Hello, everyone, and welcome. So today we are talking about where work breaks. Are we looking at the process or are we looking at the people? For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Lepore Lindsay, and it is so great to have you today. Whether you are catching this live or catching the replay, we are going to have a great conversation that surrounds engagement in the employee experience. And you may notice I have a guest with me, a maybe a familiar or unfamiliar face, Anthony Calleo. And Anthony, I'm so grateful to have you joining me on today. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, Lepore. I'm excited to be here.
Good. This is going to be a great conversation. I know that I forget what platform it was where we initially met, but we had such a great conversation around employee engagement, the employee experience. And I know that those two can be defined as different things, and we may not be able to get into that today, but I really appreciate all of the content that you share on LinkedIn, the social media platform, around these different types of topics that really help employees move forward. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone and let them know a little bit about you and what it is that you stand for.
Yeah, oh, I love the question. And again, thanks for having me. So, Anthony Calleo, I am the founder of Calleo EX, which, in a nutshell, what I love to do is help individuals and companies show up the best version of themselves every day. And that is done through, company culture and employee experience, for sure. And it's, informed by my 30 years of experience inside corporate and trying to, work inside companies. I worked inside these companies as large as Disney. And then, now I spend a lot of time with small businesses and startups, which is, seems to be a really neat place to work because it's the clay. What I call the clay is still not hard yet, right? And
Yeah.
they're still shaping culture as they scale. So, yeah, again, I appreciate your words on the thought leadership I put out there. I mean,
Yes.
I just love the dialogue around employee experience and company culture, and just making I have a basic philosophy which boils down to, if you have employees, there's two things. One, you have a moral obligation to treat them well, and two, there's a financial obligation, right? Because engaged employees deliver exceptional customer service, both internal and external. It really is. It really is that simple. So there is, I think, a people, human, moral aspect to it, but there's certainly a business and profit aspect to it as well.
Oh no, that's good. That's really good. And that's so important because a lot of the questions that I hear from different organizations or corporations is like, what is the benefit in truly caring about the employee experience? And you hit the nail on the head that there are so many tangible um, and intangible benefits that come from putting the employee first. All right, y'all. So today we are talking about how most organizations can struggle with employees. And typically that means that something is breaking. And so we have Anthony here today, and we're going to delve into it. Is it the process? Is it the perception? Is it the people? Like where is the break happening? So Anthony, my first question for you is, what are you seeing in the workplace right now that is making work harder than it should be?
Yeah, I love the question, and it's a great way of starting off our conversation. And for me, and this comes through, my couple decades of working in this space. For me, in the last, I would say, year or two, it really came down to, it's about how people are showing up, right? It's how
Right.
individuals are showing up and how leadership is showing up. Because at the end of the day, we can create the best learning and development initiatives, we can create the best cultural initiatives, but if employees and leaders aren't really leaning into it, right? And we come up with these great value statements and great mission statements, and we throw them up on websites and posters in a conference room, but we don't attempt to operationalize them. We don't attempt to live by them. They're just words on a wall, right? It's just marketing basically at the end of the day. And so, I came through, it took me a little while to get there, and it may just sound obvious to people, but it really is important that how leaders, if leaders are going to, lead a cultural initiative and individual contributors are going to contribute to that, how they show up is extremely important. And, they need to show up their present selves. And, you talk about the ultimate diversity and belonging.
Yeah.
Um, If an employee can show up each day at work and not he or she not feel like they need to be wearing a mask, they need to be not who they are, but who they think their boss or company needs to be, which can be very exhausting. If they can just show up unencumbered by that and just be them present selves, that's ultimately how you're going to get to good culture. Yeah, you need to have the frameworks and the policies and the crafting of all the statements, but at the end of the day, I think companies that do all that work still find that there's some friction or resistance. It's really about, okay, now you've got to focus on how people are showing up every day.
Yeah, no, that's really good because it can be so dynamic in regards to all of the different things that people may be experiencing in the workplace, and it's really important for the organization or employers to be mindful of that. So, with that, the question that comes to mind is, let's say I know that you've worked with companies of all sizes. Let's say that you have a leader or a supervisor who is really trying to be in tune with everything that is going on with their employees, but they're saying that's a lot. Like, that's a lot to look at when we're talking about what are all of the different factors. So, what is a way that a supervisor or a leader or an organization can work on improving that environment when there are multiple and different perspectives at play?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first, I think it comes down to the individual, right? It's I hear this phrase a lot, and I'm sure you do, but it's still a good one, which is if you're on an airplane and there's an emergency, there's a reason why they want you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else, right? You've
Right.
got to be in a place where you're available to help others, right? And so for me, in a corporate setting, that's a question of coming into showing up as a state of presence, right? And if you're present, then all of those other things are going to start to come to you. And just let me just quickly define, in my view, what being in a state of presence is. And this applies to work, it applies to outside of work, and it basically is this: like, we carry a lot of stuff that does not belong to us, simply does not belong to us. It's the programs and conditions that have been handed to us by
Yes.
parents, by teachers, by people we work with, and not out of maliciousness, right? It's they're running their programs and they're running their conditions on, and so we absorb all of those. And so what we find is we're running on their programs and conditions. We're not running on our own beliefs. And so once you can go through and there's different ways, different coaching, different methodology. I have a program called Reset It that allows you to do this. But the bottom line is, if you could shed those programs and conditions where it's just you and you're getting rid of all the stuff that doesn't belong to you, then you're operating in a state of presence. And when you're doing that, you're going to begin to receive what you need to receive, right? And you begin to control what what you could control. So that's what I mean by, individual contributors and leaders have to show up when everything is present. When you have those, when you have those competing interests, that's where there is an alignment, right? Maybe you don't have a missions, visions, values inside the organization, right? That organization
Yeah.
North Star. And so there's really, if you're not working towards a set of values together, and each individual can, interpret those values a little bit differently, as long as you're living those values. But if you don't have that North Star, that's when you start getting that friction, you start getting that chaos. And I think that, I think it's not like you're going to have a crisis-free organization, right? Because crises happen. But what the difference is when a crisis hits, are you going to spiral out of control, or are you going to be like, wait a minute, we got this. We got each other. We care for each other. I know I'm in a safe environment where I can raise the fact that there even is a problem. And I know that we're going to address this. And I know my leadership's going to have my back, right? So this, idea of a frictionless organization, or there's never going to be any crisis, that's just not real. That's just not real. It's not, it really isn't. So grounding it back to your question, if there are those competing interests and those competing frictions, that's where you have to really start looking for, okay, we need to start getting aligned inside this organization, right? And that really does start with, what do we value? What's most important to us? And are those values just going to be words on a poster in a conference room wall? Or are we going to actually start, espousing those and living by those day in, day out, what I call operationalizing them?
Oh, that's good. That's really good. So really quick, so if anyone is just now joining, you can tune in at any, well, you can ask questions at any time, share comments at any time. I know that Anthony would absolutely love to hear from you. I love to hear additional questions from other people and hear different perspectives. So please feel free to share those in the chat or just simply let us know that you're here. I don't always know. So feel free to do that. Anthony, you mentioned in regards to, there was something that you said as far as we carry all of these different things that are with us into the place, and then you tie that into knowing what our north star is. So can you talk a little bit more about, I know you have a program for it, so let me know what you can and cannot share, but can we talk a little bit more about how does one come into the workplace and let go or release some of these things that don't belong to us, yet and still it affects how we show up in the workplace and perhaps even shows up how we view the North Star.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And yeah, I will, I love to share a lot more than I love to sell, right? Which is probably not great, right? But it's just right. But I do have, there is a methodology called Reset It, right? And
Yeah,
I'm a certified Reset It partner. And the Reset It program essentially allows you to do is it resets all that programs and programming and conditioning. So it's just you and in your absolute present self, right? And I know there are other, and there really are other methods and technology techniques out there. For me, the Reset It program spoke most to me about and what I believe, because there's not only there's a lot of psychology behind it, but there's quantum energy and a quantum energy field. So it really the program really spoke to me. But yeah, it's basically like, again, working on yourself first, being absent of those programs and conditions. Because if you think about it, like if you and again, whether you believe in the quantum energy field, and if you just look at the psychology of it, right? If
right.
we're all showing up to work every day, and I don't care how big or small your organization is, and we're all carrying our luggage to work, and we're all wearing a mask, right? Because we can't be our authentic selves.
Yeah.
There's inevitably going to be a ton of friction inside that organization, right? So you can have the best mission statement on the planet. You can have some values that you think as an organization you really love, and you want your employees to live that. But if they're bringing all that baggage to work, right, it's going to be very difficult to operationalize any of that. Which again comes back to the very first question I answered, which is what's essential to me is how people show up every day. And
Yeah.
I know we're talking about work, but I think this is in life too, right? And even a lot of what we talk about in the Reset It program are things that you can bring home too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a question here from Annette, and it says, what are thoughts on working with teams with varying views and styles of how to achieve success?
Yeah, I love the question. Thank you for that. To me, it all is about what's the true collaborative environment inside an organization, right? Are teams really empowered, for one, and from a collaboration standpoint, is everybody inside that team, do they all feel safe to speak up and contribute ideas, right? And it's the old, I can't tell you how many times I heard a leader say, my door's always open, right? Or we want people inside this organization to speak up, and then somebody actually buys into that. They make a comment in a meeting, and then lo and behold, either that day or a day later, they get pulled aside and says, you really shouldn't have said that, right? And so it really is about, for me, it is about that enablement of like, how safe are teams really? And are leaders being mindful of the fact that they're doing all the talking, and in their leading, what they're doing is, in a lot of scenarios, I see leaders who, end up making suggestions that become orders, right? And
Yeah.
so it really is, for that, for working in teams, it's like, what is that true collaborative environment? Does everybody feel safe? Does everybody feel willing to speak up? And that doesn't mean like we implement everybody's ideas, right? But it really does mean like everyone's ideas are heard, they're respected, and an idea can come from anybody inside the team. So for me, the team dynamics is really about enablement. So are you just handing teams a bunch of work and telling them exactly how it needs to be done and you're micromanaging them? Or are you setting just these large goals to say, these are the things that need to get done. This is when it needs to get done. Go ahead and accomplish it however you need to accomplish it, right? And you can, there could be constraints like budgetary and obviously time constraints. But are you, telling teams what to do, or are you empowering them to do it? Is, to me, is really the big difference there.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that, thank you so much for that question. That was great. And, Anthony, as you were answering that, it kind of made me think back to, what our topic is as far as perception versus the process. And so on one side, as you're talking about how people may view these things, we have the how people interpret their role and they interpret what they do. But on the other side of that, we also have the friction that builds inside what is already present in the organization. And so I guess my follow-up question for you is, in those types of situations, if there is an either or, which one is it? Is it more so the perception that people have, or would you say it's more so of how the system or the organization is built that creates whatever that outcome is as we're working with teams?
Yeah, I got you. I mean, listen, we know the perception is the reality, right? For folks, and we know, like, in team dynamics and collaboration, anyone that feels, anyone that feels under any kind of threat, it's the same psychological, it's the same physiological and psychological effect of if you're threatened, by a wild animal, right? Well,
Yeah.
it's that same emotion, right? It's that same threat feeling, and so that's going to be, trigger a fight or flight reaction, which is not the dynamic you want. So if employees have a perception that things are a certain way, that's the reality that you're dealing with, right? And so as a leader, it's very important for you to know the ground truth. When you're in those one-on-one conversations that you're having with team members, are they telling you that they're not feeling enabled? Are you even giving them an opportunity to say that, right? Like, how'd you feel in that meeting? Do you feel like you're being heard, right? That's where, in a leader, that's the difference to me between leading and managing, right? Managing is you're just a task manager. You have the culture of meetings will continue until morale improves, right?
Yeah.
Or is it, no, we've got a true collaborative environment here. But yeah, if the perception is that, we're not valued, or, we really can't raise issues, or, if there's a challenge, I'm afraid to bring it up. Any of that, anytime you have any type of fear, anytime your organization is running any type of fear, that's when you're going to have significant friction inside the organization.
Yeah. No, that's good. So I guess my follow-up question is, this the having conversations based off of the perception of one employee, is it something where it's just one employee and a leader should try to make that change, or is it something more so where we're looking for trends and we're looking for patterns before making those adjustments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and a great point. You want to look for trends, right? It's not, I always say, even like when employee feedback, you don't want to be transactional, right? You want to, if an employee says or does something, are they saying and doing it consistently over time, right? I mean, obviously,
Right.
if it's egregious, it has to be addressed. But I think, to your point, no, you want to, are you hearing it from one employee? Are you hearing it from multiple employees? And then, are you, as a leader, you know, using your own programs and conditions and just telling the story that you need to hear, because you're under stress, you need to get a deadline, you'll be collaborative next time, like, team, just trust me, we just need to get this done right now, next time we'll be super collaborative. It really doesn't work that way, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it can be the issue that it is just a single employee. To me, it's an important reminder to say, if you do have an employee who, you've got the most ideal environment, you've got tons of feedback, you've got the psychological safety, and you have an employee who's being a challenge, that's when you want to start it. You want to start coaching and mentoring that employee, right? But
Yeah.
being mindful of the fact that you're paying attention to the rest of the team. I mean, one of the mistakes that we make is, we've got these super high performers. They're
Yeah.
not my squeaky wheel. So I'm just going to let them do what they do. And I'm just going to focus on this part of these challenges inside my organization. So you really need to focus on everybody.
No, yeah, that's good. I was so curious because I've seen, as an employee and even partnering with organization, I've seen both pieces of this. Oh, there we go. I'm not. Oh.
It's like we took some kind of technical glitch, but we're still here.
Okay, I was
But,
like, what
those
did I do?
organizations that you work for don't want you spilling the beans.
No,
So
they don't. Maybe I
they
should
took you
change my
out. They took
question.
you right out.
I need to change the question. No, I'm going to ask it.
Yeah, let's challenge this. Let's go.
So yeah, I've seen on both end, both as an employee and also in partnering with organizations where I've seen both cases where sometimes they're focusing on the one person because there is the mindset that maybe this one person is representative of X amount of other employees that they just don't feel comfortable enough, and maybe this is the one person that feels comfortable enough to speak up. But then on the other hand, we have the individuals who, no matter what is happening, they are going to speak up, even if other employees don't necessarily match that perspective. And so it's always interesting just to hear, how does one navigate an environment when you don't know what the reasoning is for someone to speak up? You just know that someone is saying something and now making those adjustments based off of that. So I appreciate your response to that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's such a reminder of how important employee listening really is and having that dialogue with employees, like what I call knowing the ground truth, like what's
Yeah.
really happening inside your organization. And that gets magnitudes more complicated the higher up you are inside an organization. And you could get, the C-suite could sometimes be quite removed from what's happening down at the individual contributor level. And it really is your responsibility to know what's happening inside your entire organization and having people responsible for surfacing that, right? You might not be able to have that type of visibility yourself, but you have to have some trusted people inside your organization that are finding those things out and making certain that you know what the ground truth is inside your organization.
I love that delegation piece. That is
Yeah,
something that is often overlooked, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's such an important piece. And the other thing that you brought up, you've brought it up twice now in regards to, even though we're talking about the workplace, we can't really separate what happens outside of work when we show up to work.
for sure.
So I guess, can you tell me a little bit more about your your idea on bringing authenticity to work and how to draw that line, or if you even should draw that line with how one shows up to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Listen, as my gray hair probably gives away, I started my career quite a while ago, and it really wasn't. It was like your closest confidants inside work, where you had a couple of friends where you knew everything that was going on, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't necessarily share that with leadership, right? Maybe you'd have to have years of a relationship with a manager before you even knew they had kids, for Pete's sake, right? And now it's just a much different dynamic right now. There is this, there sort of is this, mix. And I think that, to the extent that an employee is comfortable sharing it, you should know what's happening outside, right? You should know that, hey, listen, I've got children, or I've got a partner and they're involved in organized sports, or they're involved in this or that. And, that to me, that's, paying attention to that true, work-life balance. But kind of going back to what you were saying before, if you look at it, let's just keep this within the work context. You know, if you look at, let's say you look at a 40-hour work week. Now, I don't know who's working 40 hours anymore. It's like way in excess of that. But let's just use like the old school baseline of 40 hours. If you're doing anything 40 hours a week that you don't mostly enjoy doing, right? That's a huge problem. And
Yeah.
you're going to end up bringing that home, right? You might not try, you might not want to, you might not try to, but you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be burnt out, and that's how you're showing up. That's how you're showing up at home, right? And even though it's not your intention. So it kind of is a two-way street, right? And if home life is out of balance, it's going to make work even more stressful. That's why it's really important, yeah, and this is an entirely different topic for a different day, but just how we haven't even scratched the surface around wellness and mental health inside organizations, right?
Right.
It's, a lot of companies are, how are you taking care of your employees? Well, everyone has a free Headspace account. Now, I'm not killing Headspace. It's a great app, but if that's your only wellness initiative, right? You really need to start taking a look at how you're really, caring, and what are you doing for your employees? Because, the next question is, yeah, you have these free Headspace accounts. What's the utilization? Well, it's not as good as we'd want it to be, right? So even what, or we have an employee assistance program. Great, those are important. How many are actually leveraging it? Well, not a lot, So it's like
Yeah.
we're really playing lip service to mental health. Again, not to go completely off course, but there is a entire infrastructure and ecosystem that companies really have to stand up to support their employees if they want healthy, engaged employees inside an organization. And so that's all part of it. And that's how, a company, an individual is going to know that, listen, this company really cares about me, and they're going to show up and bring their whole self every day. And that's
Yeah.
ultimately what you want.
No, that's good. I keep hearing you say, as far as, when companies or organizations, when they have these initiatives, just having that in and of itself is not sufficient. Like, anyone can say, "Oh yeah, we have learning and development, we have mental wellness," but how effective is this program really? How is it helping to improve the employee experience? Is it helping for employees to feel like they can engage in a way that is going to be helpful and that is going to be useful? I think that's so important, because it's not about anyone or anything having more, but it's about what the resources that you have, or the tools that you have, how is that, even that, beneficial in the workplace? So that is such a good point, and I'm so glad you keep reiterating that throughout, because it's so important.
For sure. And again, like those couple of programs in particular, generally employees are going to hear that during new orientation, and then they're
Right.
never going to hear about it again. Right. I mean, that's just, or, it's during the recruiting process, it's used as something. So yeah, it's extremely important. Again, to your point too, it is just one little aspect of the overall employee experience, but it's definitely an important one.
Absolutely. So I know we're winding down on time here, but I would love for people to understand and I know you've shared this before in some of your content on LinkedIn, but you've shared before a story that kind of brought you into the importance of the employee experience, and I would love if you could just share a little bit snippet of that, just so that people can understand, like, what can potentially happen that creates this need for knowing that it's important for us to focus in on the employee experience.
Yeah, I love and really appreciate the question. So, it's funny how I had gone through life really, starting as a learning and development professional and then getting involved in culture employee experience. It was only really recently, like, why do not like, I understand why I have the frameworks and the approaches I have, but like, why do I personally feel about work the way I do? Like, what informed me? And so, I had a little bit of fun with chat GPT and some other AI platforms to say, and I literally said, I gave it my date of birth and the time of birth. And I said, look at all of the major historical events
Yeah.
and how they may have impacted my life. And, it was things like, Watergate and the wrap up the Vietnam War and all these, some anti-government movements and stuff. And then I looked at, my father was, very, was a Teamster, very blue collar, incredible work ethic. And so I started taking a look at, all the different things. And I should be like, part of me is like, I should really be work is just a paycheck, just be happy you have a job. And I've heard those have always been like echoed to me by not such great managers. Like, just be happy you have a job. Like, stop complaining, right? And I should be totally in that school, but I'm totally
Yeah.
not. I'm like, again, you have employees, you have a moral obligation to treat them well, but there's also a financial obligation. So
Right.
I think it's seeing my father come back from a really hard day. He was a blue collar worker, seeing him come back from a really tough day's worth of work, being the first generation going to college. Right. And so it's breaking out of that mold of, does it really need to be this way? Does work should work only really be a paycheck and a means? And again, we all have bills to pay. We have families to take care of, partners to take care of, taking care of ourselves. But there is a greater sense of what else you need to be doing. So it really was this, like, for me, a really interesting examination as to why I feel the way I feel. And quite honestly, I'm still exploring it, right? I'm still
Yeah.
trying to get a little bit deeper into the, like, why do I think the way I think? And then also challenge that thinking, right? To make sure
Yeah.
that, or, do I have some new ways of thinking and applying what I want to apply? It's probably a long-winded roundabout way of answering your
No, that's
question, but
good.
I'm still exploring it. I'm still having fun with it. And I encourage anyone to do that, right? It's like, why do you feel the way you feel about learning and development, organizational development, and beyond the, Maslow, and I'm following this model, and, Myers-Briggs, and, like, beyond all of that stuff, like, what's your personal North Star, and what are your values, and where are they come from? I mean, that's kind of the journey I'm on now.
Yeah, I love that answer so much, Anthony, because I think a lot of times, especially because, I like we're having this conversation because employee experience, that's your go-to. You are the expert in that. And to have you say that you are still exploring and evolving, I think that that speaks volumes to being not only just a continuous learner, but being also understanding that that is also how the employee experience work. That is also how the engagement works. Like there is no, this is the way and will be the way forever. Like the workplace is constantly evolving, and so I really appreciate that answer because I feel like that probably says more than what you realized it said, or maybe you did realize you said it, but it just to me, I think that was I really appreciate that answer. All right, y'all. We are winding down on our time here. We I don't see any more questions, but if you have any, now's the time to put them in the chat. Um, Anthony, as people are getting ready to, as we're getting ready to wind down here, I would love for you to share your contact information, and so that way, people know how they can reach out to you if they want to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You were very generous to highlight the fact that I am very active on LinkedIn. I put a lot of thought leadership out there. So I encourage people to connect with me there, follow my content there.
Okay.
And again, it's not it really is thought leadership, right? And you could actually see that journey of, if you look back at the current series I'm working on, and, another additional come out, another article come out on Tuesday. My first article is really why I see work the way I do, right? So definitely follow me on LinkedIn, my company website, which is CalleoEX.com. You can get some information. You can get some information there. I do little damage on Twitter too from time to time, but LinkedIn is really a good place for me to connect. For folks to connect, and I would love for folks to engage with my content as well too, and challenge me, right? Like you said, and I think I love you so beautifully summarized the journey I'm on, and I'm grateful for hearing that from you. But I'm open, like I said, constant learner, and the one parting thing, not that you asked, is it's a reminder too, like, it's not like we've installed, culture and we're done, right? It's not
Right.
like, this is not a appliance where we install it and maybe it'll break down 10, 15 years from now, right? We've got to continually work on it. I like the love the whole, like, constant gardener mentality of, we've got to make sure the ground is fertile. We got to keep growing. We got to keep pruning. We got to keep replanting.
Yes. No, that's perfect. Absolutely. A constant process, a
Yeah,
constant learning and growing and tending to it, right? So that we're not just, we're putting something set in stone 5 years ago and thinking that it's good to go.
for sure.
All right, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. For those of you who, if whether you're watching this live or you're catching the replay, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you reach out and connect with Anthony. And remember, as always, no matter what you are doing, remember to stay adding value.